Welcome to the Estate of Reality podcast. Join two of the smartest people in real estate as they talk about the reality of today's real estate world. It's nothing like TV. This is the real world. If you are planning to buy, sell, or invest in real estate, or if you are a real estate agent, this podcast is for you. Your hosts are Melissa Haley, broker for North Texas Top Team and CEO of Agent Advantage Coaching and Training, as well as Stephen Etzel, real estate broker, instructor, and owner of Stephen Etzel Real Estate Consulting. Join them as they talk about all things real estate. Subscribe today to catch all of the episodes.
Well, welcome everybody. I am Melissa Haley, the CEO of Agent Advantage Coaching and Training and the broker for the North Texas Top Team Realtors. And today I got Stephen here with me. Hi, Stephen.
Hey, how you doing?
I am great. Tell everybody about yourself.
I'm Steve Etzel, broker owner of Independent Realty, and also I should say, a lead instructor or only instructor of real estate education and training.
There you go. You know, that's the best part, right? Is that we just get to teach other real estate agents and do all the training. And, you know, it helps when we're learning and growing and passing that information on, right?
100%.
Awesome. Well, so today the topic of discussion is probate. And probate, I mean, it's not something everybody has to deal with all the time. And you think, you got into real estate and you're going to learn about selling houses, but probate's a pretty important topic, right? I mean, it's something that you may run into as a real estate agent, or you may be a homeowner that, you're involved in a real estate transaction and somebody's passed away and now you got to figure out this whole probate thing. So you want to talk about that today?
Yeah, it's going to be definitely a different conversation. And unfortunately, we deal with the living and we have to deal with sometimes the heirs of the past as well. So, having to explain it, having to walk through it could be very challenging sometimes, but hopefully we can help you and give you some great pointers, give you some ideas of what to ask the seller before you even take the listing, and give you some great possible questions before you enter into the actual listing itself.
Yeah, well, I think that's important. So can I tell you a little story about what's going on in my world right now? We took a listing at my office, and it's not my listing. One of my agents took the listing, and the listing was a married couple, and one of them was in pretty poor health. And so the other spouse had power of attorney. World is good. We're getting all the paperwork signed. We got the house listed. We got the pictures done. We're on the market. We got some showings. We got some offers. And literally right around the time that the offers started coming in, and we did get multiple offers, the seller that was not so well passed away.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so, of course, screeching halt, not signing any contracts, calling all the other agents saying, hey, it's going to be a minute before we can respond, because now not only can we not respond because we've got all this probate stuff that's about to start, but in the whole realm of all of it, it's not even just the paperwork and the stuff, it's the people. Because now we've got a distraught seller who's grieving, and there's just a lot of emotional things that are going on, and you just can't even think. When somebody passes away, the first thing you don't think of is, let me call my realtor. That's just not on your radar,
That's not the last thing on your mind.
Right. And so there was just a lot happening. And so, pulling the house off the market, not going to sell. We're going to go through probate. We're going to circle back around at some point in the future when we're ready. But man, there's just a lot happening. There's a lot to unpack in this conversation. So I don't know. Tell me what you're thinking about my particular situation. Like, we had this power of attorney and that stopped, right? So we had power of attorney. The power of attorney is no longer good because somebody passed away.
And, a lot of people get that confused too, because I was dealing with somebody the other day that it's kind of the same scenario. They had power of attorney, but unfortunately, the person that gave them the power of attorney passed.
Yeah.
And they said, hey, can I still sign? The answer to that question is no. All right. Because
Yeah.
power of attorney means power of representation. And you represent the person that gave you the power through that paper. So if they pass, you don't have power of attorney any longer. That's why we have to let the power of attorney go, per se, and pursue other ways of doing things.
Mhm.
And it's like I try to teach people all the time, not every listing is a good listing as well. So if you don't ask the proper questions and you got into a situation with the power of attorney, per se, and somebody passed, you basically don't have a listing, or you don't have anybody to sign on your behalf. The interesting thing that you said about this whole thing was this: a married couple.
Yeah.
Now, that's the interesting part, because a lot of times it depends on how that title is held. And so there are things that we can do to bypass probate. Now, before we're going to start this conversation, I'm going to do this. We never give legal advice, and this is not giving any legal advice. This is generally speaking about general knowledge of real estate. All right. So we're not doing anything legal here. We're just kind of giving some ideas, and we're going to give you some basic concepts of, maybe you can ask your attorneys about. That's what it's all about, right? We don't want to get involved in something that's going to get us into a legal situation, right? So you always want to ask your lawyers. But having a married couple, I mean, that's very interesting, because they hold their title differently as well. It could be joint tenancy, community property. If it's joint tenancy, community property, what could have happened? Well, joint tenancy bypasses probate.
Yeah.
So there's a possibility that it doesn't have to go to probate. But the bottom line is, who do we have to ask? Get the attorneys involved to make sure that's the proper way of doing things.
Yeah. And I think that's important, because if I'm a real estate agent, first of all, I'm not supposed to give legal advice to start with. But second of all, we tell people all the time, if you're a real estate agent and you have questions, go talk to your broker. But when you go talk to your broker, they're probably going to be like, all right, so here's where we're going, to the attorney. Because, man, even if we thought it was one way and it wasn't, we don't know all the little nuances, and we're not reviewing that paperwork. And there's just so much more to it,
It's a mess. And, community property in Texas is a disaster. Could be a disaster too. You know what I mean? So what's community property? What's not community property? Then they could be married with children before, children beforehand. So what happens is, we just can't sit there and say, oh, well, you're married, don't worry about it, it's community property, you automatically inherit it. That's not the way that works. So the other thing too is, I always encourage everybody, even though under community property laws in the state of Texas are, 50-50, if you will. And let's say you are married to somebody, you don't have any kids, you die. Technically speaking, even if you don't write a will, who's it going to go to? Your spouse, right?
Right.
But am I going to say that advice? Of course not. Right? I'm going to say consult your attorney. That's why I always encourage, even if you're married, you should still probate.
Well, and here's the other thing too is, man, I don't know about way back in the day, but today, lots and lots of people are remarried. That's and right. Maybe had kids from that first marriage, or maybe they have kids together, and maybe the other spouse had kids from their marriage. Like, who inherited what part of what? And it can get super complicated, especially if it's a blended family. I mean, man, super complicated.
100%. I mean, it's just like, you're looking at probate, and probate to me looks like a settlement. You know what I mean? You just kind of look at it and go, okay, during the probate proceeding, let's go ahead and distribute the asset. I mean, can you contest? Of course you can contest wills, living trusts, and all the rest of it. But the bottom line is, let the courts decide on what's going to happen, not me. And so that's why it's important to ask questions before you enter into the contract, because you never know. And so what I have lined up here that, if you want it, we're actually going to offer it to you, is probate questions before you actually get into the actual probate situation. Because a lot of times, not every listing is a good listing.
Right.
And the sad part about it is, we normally don't find out till we're halfway through. Another thing too is, when somebody dies, what people don't realize is all debts pass with that.
Right.
And so I've had somebody one day tell me, well, my grandfather died, I inherited a $500,000 property. Well, here's the problem. How much is owed on it?
Right.
Well, $486,000. Well, guess what you just inherited? $486,000 bill. Does that make sense?
Right.
And so people seem to think that they get it debt free, number one. And number two, for some odd reason, they think probate is over in like 2 days. Right. That's insane. More than likely what happens is you have to file for, probate, testamentary letters, and that's 30 days. That could be a 30-day wait. Then they got 60 days to send out to all the potential heirs. So you don't even have anything done until 90 days. You see what I mean? So if you think that probate is going to be done in 2 days, that ain't happening. All right.
Yeah.
So, so we're going to have to figure this thing out before we get involved.
I agree. And I think it's funny that you said, well, what if I inherited somebody's property, like my grandpa passed away or whatever? And sometimes that is the case, is that somebody calls you because they have inherited someone's property and they're ready to sell. But, then again, like with mine, it happened in midstream, right? We weren't even it wasn't like we were taking the listing after someone had passed away. It was prior to, and that can happen too, right? So I think being mindful as a real estate agent to just understand we got to tap the brakes anytime that property has anything to do with someone who has recently passed, whatever that might look like, whether it was before they called you or after they called you. Stop, slow down, and be empathetic too. Be empathetic to the family. If anybody ever called me and they said my grandma passed away and I inherited her house, I'm not starting with, well, awesome, when do you want to sell? I'm starting with, man, I'm really sorry that you had a loss of a loved one, right? Like these are people. And start there, and then they'll probably give you all kinds of, story about that person and how great they were or whatever that looks like, and at least have that moment to have that personal relationship with that consumer, I think is important.
Very emotional time.
Mm-hmm.
You can't rush people either. You can't say, well, how about I call you back in 2 days? That doesn't work that way. You
No.
gotta be a little bit more compassionate about what's going on, because most of the time people are lost, bewildered. They don't know where the will is. If there is a will, if there's a living trust, they don't know what's going on. There's a law in Texas, if the estate's less than $75,000, you do a affidavit to actually transfer the assets. It's called a small estate affidavit, which is basically at $75,000 or under. So, there's a lot of things going on. So that's why you want to make sure that you're talking to these people. And also, how about if they do have an attorney, talk to the attorney about it. You should be actually working with Tangent with them as well, because they're the ones that are handling this more likely on their side of things, and we got to do it appropriately. So that's why questions to ask before you get involved is going to save you a lot of time.
Yeah. And what I like you mentioned is the timeline, because I think sometimes people are like, I'm calling you right away because I know this is what I want to do, but they're not ready yet. They don't know what their timeline looks like because they don't know what the probate thing's going to go through, right? But sometimes I know if there's a will or sometimes I don't. But I also find that sometimes I get phone calls from people and they're like, so-and-so passed away, and they passed away a month ago or 2 months ago. And, maybe they're already in that process and they're gearing up to start moving towards, I want to sell this piece of property. And depending on the situation, sometimes I just tell them, you know what? I get you, and I'm happy to help and give you some information so that you can start educating yourself and you can make the best informed decision when it's time. However, if they're grieving like the loss of a spouse or something like that, I always tell them, I'm like, do not make this kind of decision right now. Your grieving process is going to be a whole lot longer than you think it is. Do not make any big, giant financial decisions right away. You really need to just sit and ponder that before you just go like, I was doing it. I think there's just a lot more to that.
Well, here's the sad part too. A lot of times when somebody passes, it's going to be their children that want to sell the property. It's going to be somebody else involved that wants to do something. And unfortunately, they don't have authority. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so they're trying to push something that probably shouldn't be happening. Let's put it that way. And so, you guys got to step back a little bit, be there for when they need them, give them some information to help them out, get the attorneys involved, and, start asking the simple questions of, give you one question, it doesn't just happen right away. Sometimes somebody will call you out of nowhere and they'll say, hey, I want to sell the property. Okay, well, what happened? Well, my uncle died and I inherited the property. A lot of times they think they inherited it and they never did.
Yeah.
So, a lot of times people have a misunderstanding that when somebody dies, it's not automatically theirs. So either A, they got to go through the probate proceeding, or if they're not even in the will, I mean, you have no idea on. And so that's why I like to always ask, I had a call the other day and somebody said, hey, I want to sell the property. My uncle died. And I said, all right. Sorry to hear that, number one. But number two, good question is, how long ago?
Yeah.
How long ago did this happen? They said, well, it happened about 11 years ago. Okay.
It's a very different story than it happened yesterday. Right.
Yeah, it happened 11 years ago. Well, did you probate? Well, no. Well, guess what? State of Texas, you got to probate within 4 years. See what I'm saying? So you're looking at it going, they encourage you to probate this stuff, right? That's the reason why. So you're 11 years into this thing. And, So I told her to call the attorney. Her attorney said he can't even help her. That's how far
no, because they didn't do it within the time frame. Well,
that and they had 11 heirs. So they have 11 people claiming this piece of property. This person's been paying the taxes on this property for 11 years and not even knowing if she inherited the property or not. And so the attorney was like, you know what I mean? And she talked to 3 different attorneys that couldn't really help her out through it. So you're looking at it going, sometimes it's so far gone, we don't know what the world's going on. And if 4 attorneys turn you down, there's a problem. So, how long have they been deceased is not a bad question to ask.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great question. When did this happen, right? When did this occur? I also think, and I don't know if this is on your list of your top questions to ask, but was there a will?
Yeah, hey.
Because if there's not a will, we're not going to probate, right? We probate the will, and if there's not one, well, then what happens? What if there's not a will?
Well, then it goes law of descent, distribution. There's other things that happen. Then you end up doing this and you end up doing that. Depends on it. Then you got to get affidavit of heirship signed. You name it, you got it. And it turns out to be a mess. So, it's crazy is what happens. And it just turns out to be worse of a problem than you can ever imagine at that point in time. Another thing that, I like to ask if they do have a will, who represents this? When somebody dies, there's got to be an executor to this thing, or executrix. And who's actually in charge? Because we're dealing with the situation. I mean, today we're actually dealing with this. And one of the kids, there's 3 kids involved in this thing. And of course, the oldest always thinks they're in charge, right? Well, kind of find out they're calling all the shots. The uncle is the executor, not even her.
Yeah.
And they're trying to sell property. And they don't even have, I go, how are you going to transfer the property if you don't even have transfer authority? Does that even make any sense to you? She's like, well, I'm the oldest. That doesn't work that way.
Just because you've been bossy your whole life and bossing those younger siblings around, this is not the time.
Yeah. So, I mean, you want to sell all these assets and you don't have authority to do so, and you're in a probate proceeding. I don't think the judge is going to like that. You know what I'm saying? So you're basically not following the rules and regulations of what we're supposed to do. Who's your uncle? Let's call him and find out what we're supposed to be doing. Yeah. Now, the executor can give the power of attorney to somebody. I totally understand that, but she didn't have it. Does that make sense? So she's out there barking orders. And so if she would have actually signed a contract, or we would have got involved in that thing, what would have happened? That would have turned out to be a mess. I'm telling you that right now. We would have got to the closing table and the title company would be like, what is going on with this?
Yeah. You probably wouldn't have even gotten to the closing table. The title company would have said something ahead of time, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure it would have probably hit the brakes on when they did the title commitment, the whole 9 yards. Probably would have been about 15 days or whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but you don't want to ever be in a spot where you got to breach the contract as a seller because you didn't have the rights to sell the property.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, you entered into a contract with no authority. I mean, what does that sound like to you? How about misrepresentation, fraud, all kinds of weird stuff can happen. So, you're looking at it going, why set yourself up for that? Let's do this thing the right way.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I think, I mean, I don't know. I'm not an estate planner. I think a lot of people, though, depending on the ages of their children, when they write their will, assuming that they have children and they're doing a will and they're doing their estate planning, they might say, well, I don't want my kids to actually be fighting over it, or maybe they're not going to be old enough to make those decisions. And so it could be an aunt or an uncle, or it could be a trusted family friend, or it could be their sibling, and their spouse, right? It could be like not even like an aunt or an uncle, but like an aunt or uncle's like spouse. It could be something like that. Who knows?
Here's another interesting fact. You get into the probate proceeding. The judge, let's say, allows you to sell the property out of the probate to bring back into the estate. You know how you can do that. Well, here's the thing. Even if the probate's settled and or they allow you to sell it, they're going to put restrictions on what the property has to sell for.
Mm-hmm.
So they're looking at 90% of the value and they're looking for 10% down. You see what I'm saying? So you got to look at this kind of situation and ask, if it isn't probate, you're selling it, what are the guidelines that we have to abide by? Because the judge can put different guidelines on this as well. And so we just don't take a listing on a piece of property and like, hey, we're listing it for 200 grand. We just got a great offer from an investor for 100,000. That ain't going to fly.
Right.
So you got to understand what the rules and regulations are. I understand y'all want money. I totally get that. But unfortunately, there's rules and regulations that we have to abide by. And of course, we have to abide by what the court systems are telling us to do as well.
Well, and I kind of like that you mentioned it could be an investor
Yeah.
because, when you file, this is public record, and there are going to be some investors that are looking in public record for distressed type properties. They're trying to get them for, whatever, how many cents on the dollar, so to speak. Not always, but sometimes. And
Right.
so now you're just this family member and you're starting to get these phone calls like, we'll buy your property, we'll buy your property. And you have no idea what it's worth, especially if you don't live here, right? If you're not, if you don't live, and I don't want to say here, if you don't live wherever the property is located, maybe you live in Texas and this property is in another state and you're like, never been there, don't know what kind of condition it's in. You have no idea what your asset is worth when you're thinking of the house as an asset or the property. It may not be a house, but any property is an asset. You got to get your due diligence before you can just be like, oh, that sounds good to me, let's just take it.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
that's why I believe that once the probate is settled and everybody kind of the smoke clears, that's when the investors come out and say, hey, look, you just inherit this property. I know you don't want it, kind of thing. It's only, we'll give you 100,000 cash and it could be worth 400. You have no idea. And that's where, as a professional agent, we got to step up and say, whoa, 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 wait a second. That's why it's so important that you hire professionals of doing what you're doing. Because I can guarantee you, if you try to go on Zillow and find out what the property value is, you don't know. You know what I mean? Or third party or whatever place you're going to go. That's why you got to have professional help to be able to do this, because people do take full on advantage of these situations.
I 100% agree. And because you are grieving or somewhere in there, you're just not thinking straight potentially, and you don't want to have anybody take advantage.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Another thing too that I run into a lot of is like life estates.
Okay.
Your life estate situations. We're dealing with one up in St. Joe right now. And there's literally 9 people in the life estate. And 7 of them want to sell, but the other 2 don't.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately, they all think that they all deserve a piece of pie, right? Or equal shares, when that's not really how that works. And so when you're looking at this kind of stuff, yeah, could they sell the property under a life estate, as long as we all agree? So that's the problem with this. A lot of times when people, and this is why I encourage people all the time, you need to have your estate planning in place before something happens.
Right.
Because the worst thing in the world is your family members are fighting over something where they shouldn't even be fighting over. If you wrote a will, a living trust, or something, will just means plan, right? What's the plan? And so what is the plan of action upon your demise? That's basically what it amounts to. And these poor people and these family members, money and family shouldn't be in the same word. It seems like, there's a lot of fighting and squabbling over things that shouldn't even happen. And so that's another reason why I try to encourage people all the time, estate planning is not a bad idea.
Absolutely. 100%. Even if you're, in your 20s, you don't know, you own real property or you have kids, you probably should make a plan.
I agree. And, like life insurance, that doesn't go to probate, stuff like that. There's certain things that don't go to probate that you can, a lot of times life insurance can pay off the house. Like I said, when you inherit the house, you inherit the debt.
Yeah.
So at least get enough money to pay off the home.
Right.
Another thing that people need to worry about is this, and this is a question, when I teach this probate class, everybody asks me this, but what happens if they transfer the property to me and they go into a healthcare facility like Medicare or Medi-Cal? They have look backs, everybody. Now it's up to 5 years. So when you're looking at this look back period, you need to talk to a lawyer on how to set up that estate properly to make sure that that look back period is not going to affect the heirs at that point in time too. Yeah. So it's not just a slam dunk deal. And people just think, oh, I'll just give this to you, and that's it. Another thing that people don't realize, which is really interesting, is you're supposed to probate real and personal property.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the fun thing is, I and the funniest thing is, when grandma passes, next thing you know, everybody goes in and takes all our furniture. You're like, whoa, wait a second here, And so you're supposed to probate everything, real and personal property, cars going to probate. And a lot of times people want to transfer personal property, and that's called a legacy, right? That's when you transfer personal property through a will. It's called a legacy. And so, like, let's say you have a medallion, that's worth $15 million. You don't want somebody going in there and grabbing that, right? You want to make sure you identify where it's going to go to, also known as bequeath, right? To leave. And so the bottom line is people need to understand and respect that as well. And that's why it's important to have estate planning in place, just in case something like that is to happen.
Yeah, 100%. If you want your wishes to be upheld, you got to tell somebody what your wishes are, and you got to do it this way.
Absolutely.
So I have a question. So say I'm a real estate agent, and my person calls and says, I want to sell, I inherited this property. And we start asking some of these questions. Have you been through probate? And they're like, absolutely. And so then you're like, well, can you send me some documents? So now they're sending me documents, and I'm a real estate agent, and I'm not allowed to interpret legal documents. So of course, first, I'm probably, as an agent, I've been instructed to bring those kinds of things to my broker, and my broker and I are going to look at it and be like, neither one of us is an attorney. So now we're probably taking this information to the title company. Is that your recommendation, is take this stuff and say, hey, title company, before we ever list, maybe we should open up the title and start doing a little preliminary research and make sure there's not any other wonky stuff before we ever put the property on the market? Is that what you're
doing? Take it to a title company and say, hey, let's go ahead and do a preliminary title search on it to make sure the chain's good.
Yeah.
Right. The one that's your Schedule C on your chain, right?
Chain of title, right? Chain of ownership.
You also want to make sure. Now, here's something else interesting that people don't know. You might want to also look for liens on properties. Because you're looking at this stuff going, yeah, somebody passed, yes, but also somebody's got to keep up paying the taxes, the insurance, and everything else on the property. There could be liens on that property that we need to be aware of as well. So you want to make sure that you take it to the title company, and it can be transferred, because they can do that chain of title pretty easily, right? That's what they do.
Yeah.
They can also pull up that preliminary title search to kind of give you an idea if there's any liens or judgments as well. Right. There could be judgments on the property. You have no idea.
Well, and they just may want more documents too. You might just have like one piece. Maybe you get those letters testamentary or something. You get something, but you just don't have everything. Maybe somebody is the executor or the executrix of the estate, and you just don't have all the paperwork. When you take it to title, they're going to say, hey, you also need to go back and get this. And I think that's important for us as real estate agents to know. And I think it's important for the public to know too. We might be asking for these things over and over again. Not all in one transaction, but we're asking for this, and then we're asking for more, and we're asking for more. But the reason why is we want the public to be able to actually go from listed to sold and closed and receive their funds. We're just guiding them through that process.
And I had a situation, this was a couple of years ago, and a lady, I asked her, I said, hey, is there any liens I should be aware of on the property? Well, we pulled up a title search and kind of find out she had a $48,000 IRS lien.
Oh,
now here's the interesting thing, how she got the IRS lien.
Okay.
Her husband died, 5 years ago, and she didn't file a final tax.
Oh no.
So what people don't realize is you got to file a final tax when somebody passes, correct? And so when you don't file a final tax, the IRS does not look at obituaries, you know what I mean? So they don't know what's going on. So all they know is you haven't filed tax in the last 5 years, and all this is racking up. Kind of find out the IRS put a lien on her house.
Oh gosh.
It
was her only asset she probably, or her largest asset she probably inherited.
That's exactly right. And I was telling her, I said, look, we got a situation going on here, because you got a $48,000 IRS lien on there. How did that happen? Well, when was the last time you paid taxes? That's called tax evasion, ma'am. All right. So the bottom line is you didn't file, and you didn't file a final tax. They're coming for your house.
Yeah.
So, and she was like totally bewildered. She had no idea that could even happen.
Yeah.
That's why we need to be there as agents to tell them you need to do certain things and call these people and get professionals involved, or else you can get stuck with a $48,000 tax lien and don't even know it. That's scary.
That is scary. Yeah. Yeah, and there could be any kind of lien on the house. I mean,
Absolutely.
you gotta go get all of that stuff. That's why it's gotta go through this process to make sure everything gets handled up on.
That's right. And she didn't probate it, obviously. I mean,
Yeah.
she didn't do anything with it except for, I want to sell.
Yeah, well, and I think sometimes, sometimes in some relationships, there's that one spouse that handles all the details, and
Mhm.
then there's the other spouse that's just living life. And then,
Yeah.
you just don't even think about it. And later you're like, oh, I mean, I just didn't even realize I needed to be doing the blah, 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 whatever. And I mean, I think that that totally could be a real situation for somebody to just be like, I just didn't realize I needed to do this, especially even if the property's paid off and maybe they got that property tax bill and they were like, I don't know, that looks like junk mail and just threw it away. Or who knows? I mean, it could have been anything. I just know sometimes people are not the one that's buttoned up in the relationship. And when they're left behind, they may not know what things they need to be buttoned up on.
Yeah. So we need to kind of probe them.
Yeah, and it's hard to ask when you're a grown person. Instead, that's one thing when you're like 20 and you're like, I don't know what to do. People expect you to not know what to do. You're 20, right?
Right.
Or 18 or whatever. But at some point when you're later in life and more mature in your age, I think people sometimes are like, I don't want to ask because I don't want to sound stupid.
It's true.
But
The stupidest question is the one not asked,
I agree. No question is a stupid question for sure.
especially when it comes to this little situation. So that's why it's always good to kind of probe, possibly, have some good questions to ask, because a lot of times the first thing you do is say, how long were they deceased? That'll tell you right then. Oh, you know what I mean? That's 11 years. That could be a problem. Who's got signing authority? We don't know. Well, we're wasting our time unless we know who's got signing authority. Is it probated? Are you planning on probating it? Because in Texas, you don't have to probate if you don't want to, right? It's your choice. So now we have what? Affidavits of heirships we got to worry about. Do you know where all the heirs are? I had one guy, all we're going to do is an affidavit of heirship. Well, here's the problem with that. He doesn't know where the heirs are.
Mm.
Now you're running around trying to figure out where all these heirs are. Next thing you know, we can't sell anything until everybody signs off.
Yeah.
So, that's what makes this difficult. And I think a lot of people, what they do is they go to Google.
Mm.
They start, researching stuff. And the bottom line is Google's not always right, everybody. So you're looking at this going, that's why it's good to have a good set of questions to ask. And it's also good to guide these people and give them the good information, not, oh, well, whatever. Have a great day. You guys figure this mess out. If they try to figure it out, they're never going to figure it out. So that's why it's good to have good resources as well.
I agree with that. And I think there's so much to know. So, all right, I got a question for you. So you said, I got this list of questions.
Yeah.
And you're willing to share that with people?
100%.
Awesome. So if we just tell people, if you would like the list of questions, maybe you're a real estate agent and you're listening right now and you're like, I really love to know what these questions are that they keep talking about. Why don't you put a comment in the chat right now? Just put a comment in that says, hey, I want the list. And if we see that you said, I want the list, we're going to contact you and reach back out and we'll get you the information. We'll get your contact information and send that list over to you. That will be helpful for you if you're a real estate agent in your business. I think that if you are a consumer and you're listening right now and this potential topic applies to you, I think definitely comment and just say, hey, I need help. Who can I call? And we'll reach out and we'll get you connected with somebody who can give you some good advice.
I got another thing that there's a good list of questions. I also wrote down like the 11 things you should do or to give to somebody to help them through their grieving process of how to collect the documents. I have 11 steps to go through.
Okay. Well, there you go. That's what we're going to give consumers then.
One of the biggest things is this, where you find death certificates, there's a phone number to call. There's a lot of times when people pass, they're on Social Security. What do? You got to call the Social Security office. They're on Social Security disability, whatever the situation is. Plan the funeral. A lot of times it was kind of weird. My mom, she's 82, and she called me the other day. She goes, "Hey, Steve, I did you a favor." I was like, what? And she goes, "Well, I planned my funeral." What? Are you dying? I was like, oh, wait a second. And I thought about it, and that was the best gift. And that was absolutely very thoughtful for her to do that.
Yeah.
And so as morbid as this sounds, everybody, unfortunately, I know two things in life: you live, you die, right? And so by making it easier on the heirs, that was very considerate of her. She said, I went out and bought my plot. I went out and scheduled my funeral. I was like, what is going on here? What kind of flowers I'm going to have? I mean, the whole thing, right? She goes, all you got to do is call this 800 number. They'll come by and scoop me up and I'm good. I was like, okay,
Oh
this
my
is
gosh.
but it was the weirdest conversation I ever had. But I got off the phone and it made me feel good. In a
Yeah.
weird way, I was freaked out, but it also made me feel like that's less stress I have to deal with. And that's what the 11 steps of helping people is, to make them, it's morbid, it's weird, it might make you feel weird, but I will be honest with you, it also makes you feel relieved. Because when you're going through these horrible situations in these times, it's one of those things where our job as real estate licensees, I'm a personal believer in this. It's not always to grind and make money. That's not what it's all about. It's
Yeah.
to help consumers. It's to tell people, hey, you have somebody here that's walking you through situations, or we have contacts that we can actually give you to help you through these problems. I don't care if I make a sale or not. The bottom line is I can look in the mirror.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's a big piece of what we do, right? I tell my people that I talk to about real estate, and my agents that I talk to, I'm all the time saying, this is a people business. We
Yes.
just happen to sell houses. And if you can, as an agent, find a way to just always be ready to help people, right? We just happen to help them with this process. I totally think that you're right. It's not all about the money. It's not all about, going and getting another sale. It's about helping that family through whatever's going on, and by giving them good professional advice, giving them good information so that they can go make the best informed decision. And if you get to help them through a sale, awesome. And if you
Yes.
don't, they'll refer you to somebody who does need you someday because you did the right thing.
Reap the reward, right? The reward is
Absolutely.
so
100%.
I can definitely give you the 11 steps that really do help out. And
Okay.
also questions to ask before you possibly go into a probate listing, which are really good questions to ask. And by the time you get to about number 4, you'll figure out, well, wait a second, I need to kind of reconsider what I'm doing here, or at least find a new approach to it.
Yeah. Or get some help from your broker for sure. All
Yeah.
right. So real estate agents listening, put a chat in right now and say you want the list of the questions to ask your client. If you're a consumer and you're listening right now and you're like, man, I need some help, put in the chat that that's what you're looking for. We got a list of questions that are a list of resources for you, not questions, but resources for you. And we'll just do what we can, our small little part here today on our podcast, to help the world and make this go a little smoother when it's probably not the most, it's not a time that anybody wants to go through, but it's a time that everybody has to go through.
We'll add one more thing, especially if
Mhm.
you're a real estate licensee, take a probate class.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. 100%. Go get educated. If you are a real estate professional, please, please, please. There's lots and lots of folks that are out there teaching great stuff. Stephen is an amazing teacher and his probate class is awesome. So sign up and take that for sure.
It's something that people walk away with, and just, it's a specialized field, but you also walk away with a sense of comfort in a lot of ways, and you also feel confident in a lot of ways. So that's what it's all about. So please take a probate class, get to understand the way the concept works, and please get somebody that tax advice, that knows taxes, legal advice that knows legal. Make sure you're dealing with the areas of specialization and stay in your lane. That's what it's all about, because these probate laws are so difficult, and it's not for every single solitary scenario. It's like whenever I teach a probate class, somebody will ask me a scenario, and it's not always like that. It's not cut and dry, right? You're going in front of a court of law, everybody. So let's think about that. Do you have probate codes? Yeah, but are there exceptions to every law? Yeah. So it's just like divorce. It's not cut and dry, right? Everything's different. And so that's why you want to make sure that every scenario has a different situation, and get the legal advice that you need.
Yep. Agreed. All right. Well, Stephen, you feel like we were helpful for all the people listening today, right?
I do believe, and I think once they get this probate questionnaire, they're going to be all fired up. And I think that they're also, I think it's going to be very helpful, and at least, give them direction.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I know it wasn't the most fun topic for the day, but I think it was an important one. So if you found value, definitely a comment, ask for that information. We'll send that to you. And join us next time on the Estate of Reality podcast, because we talk about all of the real reality of the real estate profession. So we'll see you all next time.
All right, you guys have a great day. Thank you.